coronavirus crisis. What the White House is saying about people reluctant to receive the COVID vaccine. Fight for the unborn. Senator Steve Daines tells us about the battle for pro-life legislation on Capitol Hill. Teaching the faith. Pope Francis weighs in on the importance of catechists. We have a report from Rome. And message from the Queen. What Queen Elizabeth is telling the people of the United Kingdom. On EWTN News Nightly for Tuesday, May 11th, 2021. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. I'm Tracy Sable. President Joe Biden meets virtually with U.S. governors. The primary objective, get more Americans vaccinated, but it is proving to be a complicated situation. As COVID cases are dropping, so too in dramatic fashion is the rate of vaccinations. This as the nation tries to turn the corner on the disease. White House correspondent Owen Jensen reports. Owen?
Tracy, good evening. In the battle against COVID-19, officials say about 58% of all U.S. adults have received at least one shot. And tonight, the White House is announcing new efforts to get more shots in arms, including free rides.
We got 6 governors with us today, Democrats and Republicans.
As the nation tries to put the 15-month-long pandemic behind it for good, President Joe Biden spoke with governors today about new strategies to get shots in arms.
We have to make it easier and more convenient for all Americans to get vaccinated.
The strategy session comes as holdouts have questions about side effects and vaccine testing. Plus, an AP NORC poll finds about 1 in 5 American adults say they probably or definitely won't get vaccinated.
By the time the fireworks fly on the 4th of July, President Biden wants 70% of U.S. adults to have had at least one COVID-19 shot. And he wants community colleges and faith-based groups to help get it done. And if you need a ride to a vaccination site, well, grab your phone and click on your Uber or Lyft app.
From May 24th through July 4th, Uber and Lyft are both going to offer everyone free rides to and from vaccination sites.
Meanwhile, in the White House press briefing room today, an update on the Colonial Fuel Pipeline cyber attack and concerns over price spikes. The company says it's working to get things up and going by the weekend.
It will take a few days to ramp up operations. This pipeline has never been shut down before.
Due to the shutdown and to alleviate shortages, the EPA announced it's issuing an emergency fuel waiver involving vapor pressure requirements for another week in places like Washington, D.C., Maryland, and Virginia.
The Energy Secretary also warned against gas station price gouging. And back on the COVID front, AAA says more than 37 million Americans plan on traveling far from home this coming Memorial Day weekend. If that happens, that'd be a 60% increase over last year. So a sign that things are definitely returning to normal. At the White House, Owen Jensen, EWTN News Nightly.
Senate Republicans came out swinging at a hearing to mark up Democrats' signature elections and ethics reform bill known as For the People Act, or S1. The political stakes are so high for both parties that the hearing itself included both pillars of the Senate, Senators Chuck Schumer and Mitch McConnell. Capitol Hill correspondent Eric Rosales reports.
Senate Republicans argue the Democrats' Bill S1 is a, quote, politically motivated takeover of the election system that would make elections less secure and more chaotic.
This legislation would let Washington Democrats dictate the terms of their own re-election races by rewriting all 50 states' election laws.
We should be focused on making it easier to vote and harder to cheat. Regrettably, I think this bill makes it easier to cheat and harder to detect.
Senate Republicans accuse Democrats of using the bill to politicize the Federal Election Commission. They also focused on the bill's requirement that states allow voters to fill out a sworn affidavit if they don't have an ID, which Republicans say will create ballot harvesting. Democrats argue S1 is a necessary response to voting laws introduced by GOP-led state legislatures, which they see as designed to suppress voter turnout.
These laws have no justification rooted in fact or purpose other than the desire for raw political advantage.
But the odds of the bill being signed into law are slim. Senator Joe Manchin, the Democrat from West Virginia, still hasn't endorsed it. Meanwhile, on the House side, the showdown is set for tomorrow when Republicans will decide the fate of Congresswoman Liz Cheney's leadership. She spoke out against former President Donald Trump after Mr. Trump claimed the 2020 election was stolen. In a letter to House Republicans, leader Kevin McCarthy wrote, quote, "It's clear that we need to make a change." Openly willing to replace her is Congresswoman Elise Stefanik. At least one Republican is defending Representative Cheney, saying she is being removed for not bowing down to former President Trump.
Cheney is making it uncomfortable for them. If you want to hide because you don't want to tick off the base and tell the truth about January 6th, you don't want to have to admit that Joe Biden won an election, Cheney makes it uncomfortable for you.
Republican Senator Joni Ernst also said that the Congresswoman should not be punished for speaking out. House Republicans are expected to vote tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock with a secret ballot. At the Capitol, Eric Rosales, EWTN News Nightly.
As we reported last week, pro-life legislation has been introduced in 46 states so far this year. But what is being done at the federal level on Capitol Hill? Joining us now is Senator Steve Daines, Republican from Montana and founder and chair of the Senate Pro-Life Caucus. Senator Daines, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it. First off, I'd like to get your reaction to the pro-life legislation that's being introduced on the state level, including 3 bills signed just last month in your own state of Montana.
Well, it's very encouraging, Tracy. Grateful for these pro-life governors, pro-life legislatures that are now not only passing pro-life legislation in the legislature, but we're seeing governors actually signing these important bills, like Governor Gianforte has done in Montana. In Montana, we elected the first pro-life governor in 16 years in this last election. And he's doing such great work. They passed the Pain Capable Act, which of course will prohibit abortions after 20 weeks, something we're fighting for here in Washington. But of course, we have challenges here. But I'm so encouraged by what's happening across the country at the state level, because these pro-life states now are really stepping it up and are going to provide, I think, great help to us long term as we work to overturn Roe v. Wade at the Supreme Court.
Yeah, and can you also talk about, the ways the Biden administration is really trying to push that pro-abortion agenda? And what are pro-life lawmakers, what are they doing and how are they responding?
Well, it's just a really stark contrast between what we had with President Trump, who was the most pro-life president in my lifetime. We saw tremendous results from President Trump and his team working with pro-life legislators. Contrast that to President Biden. Sadly, President Biden has had a radical shift to the left, and particularly on the issue of abortion. Here we had President Trump, who is strongly pro-life. Unfortunately, President Biden is now just such a pro-abortion advocate. He's the most radical, most pro-abortion president I think we've ever seen. And he's back now, I think, to basically paying off Planned Parenthood after this last election, because they raised millions of dollars to get him elected, and it's payback time. And at the bottom line is we must do everything we can in Congress now to protect the most vulnerable in our society. That's, of course, the unborn, the elderly, and the disabled, protecting all life. But look what's happened here under President Biden already. They've excluded Hyde protections in that COVID relief package that they passed on a purely partisan basis earlier this year. That's the first time in 44 years that the Hyde protections, which do not allow for taxpayer dollars to fund abortions, he had that removed. And that's what Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi, and President Biden passed. He nixed the policy that prevents taxpayer dollars going to fund abortions overseas. President Trump had stopped that. President Biden put that back in place. And then if you really look at what happened, sadly, with this new Secretary of Health and Human Services, which is Javier Becerra, he is one of the most pro-abortion, probably the most pro-abortion secretaries of Health and Human Services we've ever had in our country's history. Remember, the Department of HHS, Health and Human Services, oversees $1.2 trillion of healthcare-related spending. When he came before the committee that I serve on, the Finance Committee, I asked him, would you even think about prohibiting any abortion at any time? And the answer was no. He couldn't think of one single prohibition of abortion, even up to 9 months in the womb, even after a baby is delivered with the Baby Born Alive bill. It simply says if a baby is born as a result of a botched abortion, you must keep that baby alive. He wouldn't even support that. That's not even abortion, that's infanticide. So it's just a really stark contrast and a sad moment in our history of how radically pro-abortion this administration is. But we're fighting back. And thankfully, we have a very strong Supreme Court. We have stronger circuit court judges because of President Trump. And we're doing all we can to stop this radical shift of this pro-abortion agenda.
Well, Senator, we don't have a lot of time left, but I want to talk about this. I know you recently appeared at the Susan B. Anthony Pro-Life Summit in Florida. Among the speakers was former President Donald Trump. I'm curious, how was that summit, and how was the former president received?
Well, the Susan B. Anthony list is one of the great pro-life groups in America. I'm so thankful for the work they are doing. Their leadership of Marjorie Dannenfelser as well as her team, they're just the best. And they gave such a warm response to President Trump, who came and spoke at that summit. We had Lindsey Graham, who's been one of my great partners here in the Senate pro-life legislation. They had Governor Ron DeSantis, another strong pro-life governor. But the president was so warmly received. It was really a chance for us to tell him thank you and how much we need his policies and his leadership here in Washington. But he was warmly received, and he gave such a strong shout out to the Susan B. Anthony list. They are such great partners in this battle for life in Washington, D.C. and across our country.
Well, Senator, thank you so much for your time today and for what you're doing. We really appreciate it. Senator Steve Daines, Republican from Montana and founder and chair of the Senate Pro-Life Caucus. Thank you again, and God bless you.
Thank you, Tracy. God bless you, too.
Well, the Vatican has responded to an inquiry by the USCCB on the question of worthy reception of Holy Communion by Catholics in general and specifically by Catholics in public office. It is a letter of guidance which Archbishop Jose Gomez has shared with each U.S. bishop in preparation for next month's meeting. It addresses unity in the bishops' conference and clarity of moral issues in public law. It also instructs bishops to dialogue with politicians whose positions oppose Catholic moral teaching. For ongoing coverage of this important story, visit our partners at CatholicNewsAgency.com. Pope Francis issued an apostolic letter today to formally institute a lay ministry of catechists. In the letter, the Holy Father states, quote, recognition should be given to those laymen and women who feel called by virtue of their baptism to cooperate in the work of catechesis. This presence is all the more urgently needed today. Joining us now to explain more about the ministry is Bishop Franz-Peter Tebartz-Van Elst, Delegate for Catechesis of the Pontifical Council for Promoting the New Evangelization. Your Excellency, welcome back. Wonderful to be with you. Tell us, what is the role of the catechist or those teaching the faith in the church, and why do you think it will help the church?
Well, this new apostolic letter is somehow a fruit of the new directory for catechesis we presented last year. When we were working on it, we realized more and more that it is at the sign of the time that the ministry of catechists should be elevated and estimated some more. And we are very grateful that the Holy Father took over this inspiration and that he has written this apostolic letter. By the theological reason of the baptism and the confirmation, those who have received gifts and charisms from God should be able and should be ready to present these gifts to the church and to be witnesses of the faith in situations, under conditions of daily life. And therefore, it's so important that there are not only parents and grandparents being a catechist for the children, but also a real ministry of catechists like we have the lecturer and other ministries in the church.
With this new initiative, do you know exactly what the training will be like and what sorts of criteria will the teachers have to meet?
Well, actually, it's derived from what St. Paul is saying in his letter to the Corinthians, that there are given many charisms to the church, and what is being received by one isn't received by another. Or like another prayer of the church is expressing it, it says, "O God, you have given us so many gifts. None you have given nothing, and none you have given all." Everybody will receive special charisms, and these should be given to the church. And therefore, it is so important when you are asking for the criteria to be able to know about scriptures, to be educated in scripture-based catechesis, to be in a good shape psychologically, in a good and mature condition, and also to know the teaching of the church.
Many churches in the United States have appointed catechists to help prepare people for the sacraments. Does this apostolic letter change what parishes have already been doing?
Well, it is meant to be a support for the parishes, but even more for dioceses, because some parishes have special needs that other parishes won't have. And therefore, the bigger context of a diocese may be the frame in which it is much more possible to do it, just to realize the different gifts and to accompany those who have these gifts and to mature them in their vocation, to realize it and to be ready to give it.
Well, Your Excellency, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it. Bishop Franz-Peter Tebartz-Van Elst, Delegate for Catechesis of the Pontifical Council for Promoting the New Evangelization. Thank you again.
You're welcome. Thank you very much.
Coming up, UN investigators say they found clear and compelling evidence of genocide of a religious minority group. Plus, Queen Elizabeth II delivers a speech to the UK Parliament. There is evidence of genocide by ISIS against Iraq's Yazidi minority in 2014. This is the report by UN investigators to the Security Council. ISIS issued an ultimatum to all Yazidis to convert or die. Thousands were slain, brutalized, or exiled, and many women and girls were enslaved, some of whom still remain in captivity. Israel's retaliation for Hamas's rocket strikes in Jerusalem yesterday is leading to new escalation. Israeli airstrikes demolished a 12-story Hamas office building in Gaza City. Drones had fired warning shots ahead of time to permit evacuation. The explosions could be felt 2 miles away. Hamas retaliated late today with a multiple rocket barrage against Tel Aviv. The White House has condemned the Hamas rocket attack. China has reported its 2020 census indicating weak population growth.
虽然我国人口总量增速是放缓的。
China announced a total population of 1.41 billion. The 10-year gain of 72 million people was a growth rate of less than 1%. Some experts are forecasting an aging population, which would impact China's economy. Queen Elizabeth II delivered a traditional speech which opens Britain's new parliamentary session.
My lords, pray be seated.
The annual Queen's speech is written by ministers but spoken by the Queen. It outlines the government's priorities for the upcoming year. It marks the Queen's first official engagement since the passing of her husband, Prince Philip. Up next, an update on the U.S. economy following a disappointing jobs report. And a look at NASA's most powerful space telescope before launch later this year. The stock market closed much lower today over growing fears of a recession. The S&P index was down around 1%, and at one point, the Dow dropped more than 500 points. Commodity prices have risen with fears the price of gas will continue to climb. The biggest drop on the market was among banks and big tech companies. Joining us now is Jay Richards, Assistant Research Professor at the Busch School of Business at the Catholic University of America. Jay, welcome back. Good to see you again. A lot to unpack here, but first, I want to talk about that cyber attack on the Colonial Pipeline, which we reported on earlier. Can you talk a little bit more about that and the impact that this will have and is having on gas prices and also the trickle-down effect?
Yeah, I mean, gas prices are the obvious thing. In fact, for the last several months, gas has been going up, in part for good reasons. I mean, there's increased demand. People are traveling, they're getting out, unlike a year ago where everybody was sort of locked down. So it makes sense that with increased demand for gas, the price is going to go up. But of course, the cyber attack on Colonial Pipelines it happened at the worst possible time. We're talking about 45% of essentially the oil and gas on the eastern seaboard. It's the sort of thing that's going to take a while, I think, to get back up and running, even if the pipeline starts going next week. And so I think it's really safe to say that the price of gas, certainly at least in the eastern part of the country, is going to continue to go up for a while.
And Jay, I want to look at the stock market, going back to that. Can you talk a little bit more about why there are all these fears surrounding a recession?
Well, if you remember, just a year ago, we were looking at 41 million new jobless claims. So we had started the year with record low unemployment, massive increases in unemployment, and then you would expect this to sort of be roaring back to normal. Unfortunately, the April jobs numbers were very disappointing. There have been a few 100,000 more people trying to get into the job market, but really not a whole lot of people getting new jobs. The question is, okay, why exactly is that happening? Partly, it may be because of political incentives and economic incentives, because of increased unemployment benefits, for instance, ironically, which just discourages people from getting back to work. But also, there's just massive uncertainty. I mean, I think what the president ought to be doing is looking at what's happened in Florida. We know now that lockdowns don't work. They don't actually reduce the spread of cases of COVID-19, but they absolutely depress the economy. And they keep entrepreneurs from being able to make plans. And so what we really need to do is open up the rest of the economy and then let the fundamentals of the American economy take shape. I think there's nothing wrong with the economy fundamentally, but the reality is that there's massive uncertainty, the continued lockdowns, the mixed messages from Washington about what we're going to do in the next few months. I think it's just dramatically depressing the economy, and we're seeing it in the stock market. And I think that's the sole source of this fear of a coming recession.
Jay, if, there is a recession that's imminent here, is there anything that we can do, personally to sort of protect ourselves and our families?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the reality is you should always have a little bit of flexibility in your income, or any time a recession happens, you can end up either with reduced number of hours or without a job. And so you definitely want to build up a bank. I mean, a lot of preppers think, okay, I want to have enough food in case there's some kind of natural disaster. Well, the reality is you ought to have a buffer in your checking account, in your savings account. You don't want to be overextending yourself, a lot of consumer debt and things like that. Just basic good financial prudence. I mean, I'm praying that this is not going to happen, because it's the last thing we need is to have a recession right now after the COVID pandemic and the lockdowns. But the problem is, I think quite realistically, it could happen unless jobs start being created and unemployment starts going down significantly.
Well, Jay, before I let you go, any final thoughts or words of advice?
Absolutely. I mean, I think a year out from the lockdowns that started a little over a year ago, we actually know a lot. We didn't know what was happening in March of 2020. We know what's happening in May of 2021. We know that the lockdowns generally don't work. We know that states like Texas and Florida in particular that have opened up their economies have not harmed their populations in any way in terms of health, but have certainly improved the economy and human well-being. I think the country as a whole needs to take guidance from what's happened in the state of Florida in particular.
All right, Jay, thank you so much for your analysis. Always appreciate it. Jay Richards, Assistant Research Professor at the Busch School of Business at the Catholic University of America. Thanks again.
My pleasure.
Beginning next January, the likeness of distinguished American women will appear on the reverse side of U.S. quarters. The first images will be of Sally Ride and Maya Angelou. The American Women Quarters program will continue until 2025. The National Women's History Museum and the U.S. Mint are inviting nominees for prominent women who have passed. And finally tonight, NASA is providing an update on what it calls the world's largest and most powerful space telescope with the iconic Golden Mirror.
We are extraordinarily excited about where we're going in the next few months, getting ready for the final phases here out at Northrop Grumman, shipping, and then getting down and processing for the launch site and going through on-orbit operations and going to normal ops and getting ready to see all that great science.
The James Webb Space Telescope, or JWST, hopes to solve mysteries of the solar system and is scheduled to launch in October from French Guiana. JWST is led by NASA with its partners, the European and Canadian space agencies. And we thank you for watching tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Tracy Sable. Good night and God bless.